Okay, this is Chapter 17, Section 2, the world of work. So we're going to start with immigration to the U.S. In U.S. history, we have three different waves of immigration that we talk about up until the 1920s. The first wave that we had was colonial immigration. These were immigrants coming from the mother countries, France, Spain, and England. That was during the colonial days pre-revolution, right? The second wave of immigration we have is old immigration. These are typically from the northern and western European countries. So still France, Germany, and Britain, but also Ireland and Scandinavia. And their background and culture was still very similar to those who were in America because they come from a similar area in Europe as the mother country. So this old immigration was from about the 1780s through the 1890s. But when we get to the 1890s, we get a new wave of immigrants. So we call them the new immigrants. And they're from southern and eastern Europe, places like Russia and Italy. But they're also coming in from Asia, from the 1890s to the 1920s. And so these areas, the southern and eastern Europe and the Asian immigrants, they have a very different culture and a very different religious background than those immigrants who were already in America or those natives who were already in America. And it's going to be harder for these new immigrants to fit in. So industrialization brought the need for factory workers. And there's lots of job opportunities in the cities, and that's where all of these immigrants come in. They're moving to America looking for jobs. But not only were immigrants moving into the cities looking for jobs, a lot of people who lived in America already in the rural areas were moving to the urban areas, the cities, looking for jobs as well. Educated white Americans typically took the white-collar jobs. These were things like retail jobs or office jobs, management professionals. They're known as white-collar because you typically would wear a white-collar shirt to work with a tie. The immigrants and the uneducated whites took the blue-collar jobs. This was the manual labor jobs or factory labor. African Americans who moved to the cities actually found it difficult to find jobs. They were turned away from many of the factories and typically were restricted to janitorial work or domestic work. Some women were able to find working opportunities at this time. African American women, either married or unmarried, usually had to do work. They usually had to have a job to help support their families, but they were confined mostly to domestic work. In the 1890s, most white women that worked were young, meaning under 24 years old, and they were unmarried. The white married women were expected to be in the home. But even though women were getting jobs, they were still being paid less than men because they were considered the weaker sex. So some of the jobs that women were getting at the time were domestic jobs, like cooking, cleaning, caring for children, or nursing jobs. Teaching was a big thing. Office jobs as secretaries or things like that. Textiles, they could work in the textile factories, as you see the women in one of these pictures. They could work as inspectors, factory inspectors. Basically, the jobs that were not reserved for the men, the women could get. Now, like I said earlier, white wives were not supposed to work outside of the home. Her place was in the home. When families needed money, it was not the wife that went to work. That's when the children were sent to work. So in the 1890s, you start to see a lot of local and state laws that were passed to limit child labor. But for families that needed money, even with all of the children working, sometimes the only option left was for the wife to go to work. Now, work at this time was becoming a little bit different. Previous to this industrial revolution, most work in American manufacturing was autonomous work, self-governing, no supervision. The factory workers were unsupervised. They were paid based on what was produced. They could set their own hours. And typically workers worked together to set limits on production. They created this sense of brotherhood. Work had a social component at the time, but they pretty much just did, what they wanted and got paid for how much they produced. But as technology and management improved, industry changed. There were a lot of advances in technology where machines did most of the work. So no longer is a knowledgeable craftsman making an item, or even a portion of an item that he can have pride in. Workers basically operated machines that mass-produced identical items. Looking at this quote from a factory worker in 1883, it says, "The trade is so subdivided that a man is not considered a machinist at all. One man may make just a particular part of a machine and may not know anything whatever about another part of the same machine. Such a worker cannot be a master of a craft, but only a master of a fragment." So work is changing. And then comes the idea of scientific management, or Taylorism, as it was called, because it was developed from the ideas of a man named Frederick Taylor. Basically, Taylorism is the idea that work should be designed to minimize production costs and maximize output, meaning you get more profits. So the theory is that production can be made more efficient through the study of workers and actions. What is the best way to do each job, and then make everybody do it that way. So workers started to do the same job all day long. The division of labor, we've talked about this before too. So there's no more autonomous work because now they're going to be supervised by managers. And there's no more setting their own hours. That's going to be set by management. And there's no more payment by production. They're paid by the hour, and they're expected to produce as much as possible. Now, employers, of course, liked the machines and the division of labor because it was more efficient. It made they could make products faster, and they could make them cheaper. They could make more profits that way. And they wanted to get the most out of their workers for the least amount of cost. They're not concerned with the feelings of their workers. And so that's going to lead us into section 3, which is going to be the labor movement.